Well, good afternoon to everyone. It's another graphics day. I'm going to be continuing from where I left off last week. And if you were here last week, you would know that I was working on a scene in Inkscape, doing graphics and illustration with a vase, a table, a chair, a window, and a wall. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And I'm not going to overly complicate it, but yeah, we're going to be covering some shading techniques and some other strategies that you can use in Inkscape, and hopefully I'll be able to do some more of these in the near future as well, so you can learn some various techniques that you can use in Inkscape to get either the more cartoonish look or photorealism, all those different things I plan to cover as we go forward. So you can tell a friend if you're on, tell a friend, tell a family member, tell your dog, tell somebody to watch, and hope you enjoy it. Also remember that the music today, as always, is from Creators Lib on YouTube. They produce free music and sound effects for content creators. And they're not sponsoring this video, by the way, but you can check them out anyway, because I think those who produce free resources should be celebrated and, given their honor for doing what they do. It's really great. Alright, so just 1 minute and we will jump right in, just to let everyone on social media know we're live. Alright, I've posted on social media. Let's get going. So, as you can see, I have this scene that I would have started working on the last time we were here. And I have overlaid right now what I'm planning to do today. If I don't get to everything today, I'll probably have I'll definitely have a second part to this, God willing. Third part, I should say, because this is part 2, so I'll have a third part to this, God willing, if I don't get to everything today. So you can keep an ear out so that you'll know when I continue. Also, just to let you know, if you have any feedback or questions or anything, you can post them in the chat if you're live, or you can also post them in the comments, and I will definitely get back to you as soon as I can. It's been great hearing feedback recently from those who are following along with my streams and benefiting from what I'm doing. Really always makes my day. It's better than money. It's really wonderful to know that I'm making an impact. Alright, so let us take a look at these layers here before I actually start doing anything. I'll explain to those who weren't here the last time what's happening here. I basically have everything in the scene separated out into layers. So we have the backdrop, which is where the wallpaper, or if you want to call it the wall, really is. And then we have the windowsill, the window edges, that's the backdrop of it, which is the shadow. I probably will clean that up a bit so it's a little less blurred. Then we have the window itself, which is the glass, and the edges of the window as well. And then we have the table edge, which was to give it a nice outline. The table itself. A second table edge, which I need to rename from copy to something a little more descriptive. We have the vase shadow, we have the vase itself, a chair, plants, and then there were initial guidelines, which I've since turned off because I no longer need those. We already have all the objects in place. And shading guidelines, which I also went ahead and added some other stuff that I may add to the scene in the window and stuff. But basically these shading guidelines are to show you where I'm planning to shade today. So I'm gonna add some shadows down here, over here, on the wall this side, behind the vase, and then some gloss as well around here, and a little bit of shading right here. Alright, so I'm going to turn off the shading guidelines for now and focus on one part of the image. Let me just zoom into where we're going to work today. Or at least where we're going to start, I should say. If you see anything moving slowly, it's just a lot happening and the computer may sometimes lag a little bit. Alright, so to shade this area here, I'm going to use the calligraphic stroke tool, and I'm going to put this behind the vase itself. So above the shadow, I'm going to add another layer. We're going to call this vase shadow 2, and I'm going to turn up the thickness on this to a pretty sizable number. And then I'm going to actually draw this in as soon as my computer allows me to. Oh wait, I just remembered I do not have my tablet plugged in. That's why it wasn't moving. My mistake. Let me plug that back in. Old USB bug strikes again, which is that you have to flip it twice before it actually goes in. Alright, now it is definitely frozen for some reason, so I'll have to wait until this waits up. Oh, there it is. Alright, finally. Now don't mind the color on this, I can change this in a second. And as you can see, it is drawing above the vase itself, but that's no real issue because it is actually behind it in terms of its Z value because of the layers we're using. So don't mind that it looks like it is above at this point in time. It's just so we can see where I'm actually drawing. And I don't mind drawing outside of the boundaries a little bit in any case, because that doesn't really, it doesn't matter, it's not going to change anything. Alright, so I'm going to turn this to black and turn up the blur. Now I don't want it to go above the table like that, so all I'm going to do is drag this down just a bit and continue turning up the blur. Turn down the alpha. And I'm also going to make this a gradient. Now you don't want it completely transparent on the outside edge of the gradient, so that's why I moved it up to about 35. The other one you can leave completely opaque, and if you want you can play around with the size of this object a bit and its dimensions so that you can get the shadow exactly where you want it. So I'm going to stretch it just a bit, of course keeping in mind that you don't want it to go above the table, so if you need to drag it sometimes you can do that as well. I'm also going to skew it just a bit. To do that, you click twice on the same object. Not double click, because that sometimes doesn't exactly do what you want. If you double click fast enough, it will go into the node editor. So you just want to click twice with a little space in between so you can get to that. Alright. Let me move this, and I'll still adjust this a little bit because I don't want it to come too far across this way. So I'm going to resize it just a bit and drag it back into position. Alright, and let's zoom out and see how this looks. Alright, I'm going to need to adjust the opacity a bit. And drag it just a little more to the right. Let me also disable snapping just for a second so I can get this exactly where I want it. Good. And turn snapping back on. And now I'm going to add a shadow above the vase itself. Okay, I just accidentally moved something there. Okay, good. I have to be careful with the tablet because it drags things a little more easily than the regular mouse. Okay, so above the vase itself, now we're going to add another layer. And we're going to call this one Shade. Vase Shade. And again, we're using the calligraphic stroke tool to allow us to do this by hand. If you're using the mouse, this is not as easy, so you could probably use Bezier lines or curves to get this effect, because it's not going to be as easy to draw by hand without a tablet. Alright, that's a bit thick, so let me bring it down. By the way, I just remembered I do have a video to upload of another tablet that I won recently. I haven't had a chance to upload that video as yet, but that is coming soon. It's an unboxing video and it should be pretty cool to watch. I plan also to record some videos of me using it. I still have to test the application for using it with my Linux system, because it doesn't come with an app that works with Linux by default, so I have to actually test a third-party program for that. Oh wait, I forgot this is supposed to go above. Let's see here, because I now remember that the vase actually has another thing here to cover the plants. Let me see if it is. If it is implants. Yeah, it is. Alright, so I need to move this down. Underneath vase shade. There we go. I was wondering why these were disappearing. For those who weren't here the last time, this section here is actually a separate piece that covers the plants, because the plants have to be drawn individually inside this area, and then you cover it back over to make it look as though they're in 3 dimensions, but it's really 2-dimensional. So it's a little bit of trickery there. And if you're wondering too why I'm doing so much of this here, don't panic. I will actually make these mostly translucent and blur them, so it will have a nice shade effect on it. I just want to get some lighter and darker areas in. There's one of the things with vector graphics that's very different from painting and drawing, is that shading is not exactly as straightforward as you might think, but it does cause you to have to use your head a lot. Alright, so the layer itself selected, I'm going to turn down the opacity. Let me just make sure that all of these are in that same layer. Okay, they're not. Somehow these got drawn outside of the layer. Maybe I deselected it by accident. So let me just select everything here and move it to that layer, so we avoid any issues. Whoops, Inkscape has crashed. Wonderful. Alright, I'll just restart Inkscape and hopefully we can recover that document easily. not to worry, Inkscape autosaves, because the developers were wise enough to know that crashes are a common thing, so the file is still there, I just need to reload it. This is one of the differences between doing this stuff live on stream and doing it for a pre-recorded video. Y'all would not see the crashes, but it happens. And plus I'm using a development build, so crashes are a lot more common than if I were using a release version. Alright, almost there. Just need to open the document and we'll get right back to it. Ran into another crash because Inkscape just couldn't be nice about it this time. Alright, I'll have to do this manually and open it from my file manager, because opening that document from Inkscape is causing Inkscape to crash repeatedly. Fun times. I almost couldn't find the document because I have so many autosaves. Okay, wait, this is not the document I wanted. I know y'all can't see what's happening, but I just went to my autosave folder and found the wrong one. So I'm gonna have to try this again. Alright, clearly I'm not in the right place, I think. My apologies for these technical difficulties. I found the document. I was looking in the wrong folder. So I should be able to have it back in just a minute. Alright, here we are. I've got it back again. Thank God. Alrighty, so here we are. Although no, I'm not seeing the work that I just did, so I'm not sure what happened there that the whole save doesn't have that information. Oh, I see what happened. I opened an earlier version of the autosave. I missed it. There we are. Oops. Clicked on the wrong layer there. Okay, so let me see if I can select these objects again. Good, there we go. Now I just need to move everything to the right layer. Oh, that's what makes Inkscape crash. It doesn't want to do that. Wonderful. Tell you what, since it wants to be special about that particular operation, I will just redraw this shading again in the right layer, and hopefully that should fix the problem. Oops. This is one of the reasons why you shouldn't do like me and use pre-release software, but oh well. I am a little stubborn when it comes to that side of things. Alright, so let's get back to this again. Fortunately, the randomness of this particular operation means it doesn't really matter too much if I have to do it over again. I guess that in some ways makes it more realistic too. One second, folks. Alright, let's get these dark areas in now. Alright, so we're gonna select everything, resize just a bit here, make sure it's in the right spot. And now I'm going to use blurring, of course. It's the first step. Then I'm going to set it to blend mode of overlay. And if that doesn't work exactly as you want, you can try another blend mode. I actually wanted to darken this a bit. And overlay is not giving me the result I was expecting, so I'm going to try another blend mode. Alright, multiply always darkens when you're using colors like this. And I'm just going to turn down the opacity. Normally I would use overlay, but I think because I'm using grey, like a really light grey as most of the color, that's why it didn't work. Alright, I'm going to turn up the blurring until I get this to give me the result I want, and tweak the opacity just a little bit if I need it to be a little darker as well. Alright, let me zoom in just a bit here and see how this looks. Alright, that's good there. And now I'm going to shade this side as well, because even though the light is coming from over here, you have to remember that if we're looking at this in 3 dimensions, that the light fall off is going to reach our eyes in a particular fashion. So light will basically wrap around the curvature of the vase and bounce off on the parts that are facing toward us at certain angles. It's kind of interesting how it works if you look at real life objects, in that sometimes even though the light is coming from a particular direction, that area may not always, like the part where the light falls most, may not always be the brightest. So to emulate that, what I'm going to do is shade this corner just a little bit, don't want to be too heavy on it, and then I'm going to put some brighter areas, which I believe is called albedo. Put the brighter areas around the section right here that would be reflecting light most to us. Now for this I'm going to use a darker color gray, and not doing it too heavy, just putting some light lines around the edges here. Now these will already be blurred and everything because we're coloring into this layer and it is already set to blur, so you don't need to individually blur these lines. After they're drawn, they'll be blurred automatically. You can't really see a difference either because obviously everything's kind of light, so I'll have to probably reshade these areas a number of times until it starts to show up. But once I have a satisfactory result, I can stop shading. Now if you have a keen eye and a good monitor, you probably can begin to see a little bit of a difference showing up. I can see it subtly there. I guess based on doing this so well, you begin to see those subtle differences. But it shouldn't be too obvious yet. And that's on purpose. I don't want it to be too heavy because this is supposed to be a lightly colored object. But I still want there to be some sort of darkness toward that corner. Alright, it's beginning to actually show up now. You can actually see some of the darkness coming in on that side. And looking nice and natural because we have blurring enabled. That's one of the ways you can save yourself some time. Blur the entire layer and you don't have to go through and blur individual objects. Although if you need even more control, you can still do that. You know, if you're trying to get photorealism, you may need to take the time and go through everything individually by bit by bit. But it is taxing on your computer if you do that too, so make sure you have some really good hardware or you may run into trouble. This is of course keeping in mind too that vector graphics were built for more of a point system of drawing as opposed to doing stuff like blurs and stuff. These blur effects are really and truly tacked on top of it, so you have to keep that in mind in terms of performance. It isn't always that bad with newer hardware, but older hardware might struggle a bit, so you know, just be careful on that one. Alright, now you'll notice too that I'm doing some shading right here, because I did mention that this area would be a little darker, so I'm just going to go right ahead and put that in this same layer instead of doing it separately. Saves me some time, some layers, some complexity. And if you're wondering, yes, I am going to shade the inner section of the vase as well, but that is on another layer, so I'll have to do that after. I have to say though, I'm really liking these results here. They look really nice. The one thing I probably would have done better is the bottom part of the vase here looks a little bit lopsided, and I really want to round that out. So I'll probably, when I'm done with this, I'll probably round that out a little bit more so it looks a little more natural and realistic. And this side here too could do it a little bit of work, I guess, in terms of curvature. Looks a bit more like something handmade, but still I want it to look less lopsided. Now I'm darkening this section up here because the way how this curves, the light would fall off more on this area right here. So I want to darken this more than the rest of it to give it that natural look. And then I'm going to put the albedo on certain sections where it's supposed to fall. You get that nice reflection of like white light around here and around here. And if you look at the shading guidelines, I would have already marked out those areas where I want to put those brighter areas. I'm just going to do some streaks coming across here, not heavy, just light, for the sake of making it look a little more natural. Now these will not be immediately obvious to the naked eye, but they're still there, so that it gives sort of a rougher texture to the vase itself. And this is to aid with things feeling natural to our brain, even though you're not immediately picking it up. If you were to look really long and hard, you'd notice it, but otherwise you probably wouldn't really pay much attention to that. Alright, I'm going to zoom in just a bit so I can get some of the harder to reach areas done. Now when I get around to using the folio tablet that I won recently, you'll see that there is a big difference between drawing on paper and drawing on the screen like I'm doing now, even in terms of shading. It's really different. And it may not seem that different, but when you actually get to do it in person, you really get to feel that difference. And it reminds me of the fact that coming to digital graphics from being a paper graphics kind of person was quite the shift for me, because I had to really readjust how I think. But I can kind of switch between the two fluently now, I think, and it's becoming a lot more natural to do that. But at first it took me some time to really come to grips with how to think in the digital sense. I'm going to put some shading right here in a sort of circular pattern. All this is just to add to some realism here in terms of how the shading falls off. And this is before, of course, getting to the brighter areas. Alright, good. I think I'm pretty satisfied with how this looks, so now I could go all day with that, but I'll give it a rest. If I need to come back and shade some more, maybe I'll do that at some point. Maybe I might use some lines or something like actual curves to do the really hard to reach areas a little better. But I think this is good as is. So what I'll do is add some white circles to represent the brighter areas. Alright, let me put these on a different layer instead, because they're not going to see them as clearly on this layer. So I'm going to lock this layer, and add another one. There's shade 2. And in this one, I'm going to add the circles I was just talking about. Alright, let me turn off snapping so we don't run into any issues with this trying to snap to objects that I can't even see. I'm going to rotate this just a bit. Oops. Didn't mean to zoom back out there, that was accidental. Alright, good, there we go. Oops, this is jumping all over. I guess because I'm working with so much, it's kind of heavy on the system, so sometimes I may be interpreting my inputs as something else. Alright, I'm trying to duplicate. Did I press the wrong key? Yeah, clearly I pressed the wrong thing just now by accident. Control D. Finally, there we go. Now you notice I'm keeping them in roughly the same shape, even though I may adjust the size a little bit. And that's because typically in real life, light falls off in mostly the same manner on objects of like standard curvature like this. That's not really shifting too much, so you won't really see a lot of varying shapes too much, at least not that the human eye would notice. So I'm going to just stick with these somewhat ovular shapes for the brighter areas and put them in different areas where the light is most likely to fall off. Well, sorry, more likely to bounce back to our eyes. And when I'm done placing these in position, I'm going to blur the entire layer to give it like the effect that we're looking for. Alright, good. So we have those in place. And now I'm going to blur them. And already that should begin to look a lot more photorealistic. Obviously, I'm still not going for complete realism because that is a lot more work and harder to achieve, but it still looks a lot more realistic now than it did before, just by adding those brighter areas and darker shades where they need to be. I just duplicated them, and keeping that selection, I'm going to group and then drag. Let me see something. Are these in the correct layer? Let me just make sure. Okay, they accidentally got added to their own layer. So let me come over here and show objects. And then I'm going to drag this set here to Veil Shade 2. Now you may notice that sometimes with this new dialogue that it calls groups layers and all that. That's because technically in the SVG specification, if I remember correctly, layers are just groups. So really and truly Inkscape is doing us a favor and giving us layers when, in a sense, even though layers do exist, they're not really a separate thing from groups. So you need to be aware of that sometimes when you're working with them and you begin to run into trouble. Alright, I'm just going to move these around a bit and keep duplicating and moving until I get the exact effects I'm going for, because some areas around them will be slightly darker, slightly lighter, and then you'll have some that are just really, really bright. Right, that looks good there. And I'm gonna just move some of these around slightly so that they don't look too overdone. Let me see what this looks like when I zoom out. Okay, not too bad. I want to adjust this layer's opacity just a bit. And I'm turning on the blur slightly as well. Now what I'm going to do is actually duplicate this entire layer. Just locked it. Now I'm going to duplicate the layer. And then I'm going to use a blend mode on this one. The duplicate. So let me try overlay first and see how this looks. And if overlay doesn't give me the effect I want, I'll try another one that's similar, like hard light. Right, let me see soft light. Alright, soft light probably should do the trick. May need to turn up the opacity though. Right, soft light is giving me what I was looking for. Kind of want to blend the layer on top of itself. Still want to keep that brightness, but we're kind of toning it down a little bit. Just so that the fall off is a little nicer. Now to blend all of this together nicely, because you can see there are some areas that are a little too dark and a little too bright. What I'm actually going to do now is grab the Viz object itself and duplicate that on top of everything else. Let me see here what we have in Viz. Okay, see, yeah. So I want to copy this and add a layer on top of these. We're gonna call this Viz blend. Alright, let's paste into this layer and then put this in the right place. All these up top here can go because we don't actually need those points. So I'm going to delete those. Make these into corners. And I'm going to resize this so it isn't going outside the bounds of the Viz itself. Put it in position nicely. And we're going to turn up the brightness on it, turn on the alpha. About 36 is good. And then we're going to blur this. You may sometimes need to adjust different values because you can't always predict what result you're going to get. So I'm going to need to turn on the alpha just a bit and see if that gives me what I'm looking for. And I'm going to drag this into the right spot, just making sure it's not covering the wrong things. Alright, good, there we go. And that adds to our realism by blending the shades together in a way. It's giving us a nice cast over everything that kind of like hides the imperfections, if you will. Sometimes when you see me doing stuff like this, you may think, well, that defeats the purpose, but no. It's blending everything together. So the bright spots are still there, the dark spots are still there, but now your brain is seeing something that blends together a little more nicely than before. Now what I'm going to probably have to do with this is duplicate and move it across this way as well, just so I can cover some more of that shaded area there nicely. Can't be too big, but it can't be too small either, and it has to blend nicely with everything. So sometimes you may need to play around with stuff like this a little bit until you get it exactly right. Alright, let me see this layer here, if I can improve this even by using a blend mode. Not necessary, but I'm just going to check it and see how it looks if I use a blend mode on it, like say soft light or even the same overlay that I usually go for. Alright, overlay looks better to me, I believe. Alright, let me try this again, because zooming out it still is showing me some of the bright areas as being a little too bright. Actually, multiply probably is giving me the best result here because the colors blend in a lot more nicely. Alright, so that's good for me. Oops. Now for those who are accustomed to painting and stuff like that, this technique can be probably a little overkill, but trust me, it gives you good results if you know what you're doing. And of course, if you want to clean up your vector designs later, you can always export and then paint over them in a painting app, but I like working in vector graphics, to be honest. Maybe a little more tedious, but I find it quite fun. Alright, so let me take a look at my shading guidelines and see what else I have to do here. Alright, I'm going to put a shadow down here and over here. I wanted to add some roughness to this, but I'm going to have to come back to this in a future stream because this will take some time. So what I'm going to do is just put the shadow here and here. And well, over here I'm not exactly sure. I may actually improve this by putting like a picture or something on that. So for now, let me just grab a new layer that should come under table. I'm gonna call that table shadow. And then I'm going to put big as a descriptor because it's technically not the table shadow, it kind of is like a floor or something. In fact, to make this even better, let me add a floor because I really and truly should add a floor to add some depth to the image. So I'm going to do that one time. I'm going to need another layer here. Floor. And I'm going to move that one beneath the shadow. Alright, it doesn't want to move it manually. I don't know. Well, not manually, but when I use the buttons, it doesn't like to move the layers for some reason. I don't know if that's a bug or what. Alright, so in floor, I'm going to add a rectangle. And I'm going to angle it. So to do that, I need object to path, and then from the node editor, I just need to drag this node up. Alright, it doesn't actually want to move. Okay, there we go. And I'm also going to drag, oops, just added a guide by accident. Alright, I'm also going to drag this node up as well. Actually, let me level things out a bit by dragging this one down somewhat. Because seeing as we have the window and the window was an angle, I don't want to make it look as though the floor is out of sync with that in a sense. So I'm just going to put a slight angle on this. And this can add some depth and realism to our image. I'm going to duplicate the floor object I should say, add a stroke to it, turn off the fill, and up here I'm going to go to stroke to path, and then in the node editor I'm going to delete these nodes at the bottom, select all the nodes and choose corner. Click it twice just to make sure everything is truly a corner. And now we have a nice line between the floor and the wall, and I'm going to blur that slightly so it looks like a shadow. Duplicate it and blur it some more, giving it a softer shadow. I just forgot I wasn't using a grid, it's just my overlay lines, and I'm turning on my grid. Alright, there we go. So now we have a nice floor in place. I could probably skew the window just a little bit to give it a nice angle so it looks a little more three-dimensional, but we'll do that at a later point. What I want to focus on now is the actual table shadow. So we're going to lock the floor. And don't worry, I do realize that the floor is slightly translucent, so the color is not correct. I will fix that in a bit. So table shadow, we're going to add a rectangle to that. Roughly about there. Object to path. And then just drag this node down here on the bottom left. Out to the left. Turn this node into an auto smooth and drag it across to the right. And then we're going to turn on the fill, turn off the stroke, and play around with our color a bit. Alright, let me skew this somewhat and see what it looks like. Alright, skewing is not going to do the trick that I'm looking for here, so I'm going to drag the nodes around so I can get it right as I want it. Good, there we go. And then we're going to turn down the alpha just to see what it will look like. This is not the final thing, of course. Just getting a rough idea. Alright, turning it back up and turning on the gradient. And then I'm going to edit that gradient to move this point over to here, because I want the start of the gradient over there. And then I'm going to drag this point out like this. And this one out like this. And then turn on the alpha on that. Okay, yeah, I'm going to need another point on this. Bring it down somewhat. And let me turn up the blur just so it blends a lot more into the floor. Might need to resize it to a bit. Can be tricky getting some of these features correct. I'm gonna duplicate and drag it down this way, resize. Now the table itself will have some shading and some lines and stuff eventually that will make this look a little more realistic, but now we actually have a shadow behind it, which is nice. I'm going to change the floor's color to be a little more solid so that we can actually see what we're working with here a little better. Alright, there we go. Do I like this color floor, or do I want it? I don't know. I think a lighter color floor is nice, but not completely white. Alright, undo. It's like a somewhat off-white color. That's nice. And now I'm going to duplicate the floor and move the floor copy above the table shadow, and then bring down the opacity on this a bit and use a blend mode like screen, blur just a little bit. Let me zoom in so I can see that the effect of this is working as I want it. Can't blur it too much, if not it's going to mess up things up here where the shadow is supposed to be. Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with that. And then, let me see, if screen is too bright, I'm going to try something else and see if that works. Luminosity will also work, but I don't know. I'm in between minds on this one in terms of the effect I want, if I want the shadow stronger or if I want the shadow lighter. I'm not 100% sure what I want from this yet. I think I like it lighter. If I use overlay, I'll probably have to blur this a little more. But then the shadow up there gets messed up. Alright, so what I'll do is... let me see if I can... right, there we go. Let me delete this. And this. And then I'm going to move these ones out from this layer into another layer above the floor. Just so that we can maintain that nice shadow effect between the floor and the wall. May need to adjust the blurring on these now that they're in a different position and playing a different role. I'm also going to duplicate this one, or I need to move these back across as well. So, right, select all and drag. There we go. Now with everybody in position, lock layer. Just add a slight blur to the layer itself. Alright, I think these need to move down just slightly. Good, there we go. Alright, so that gives us that slight line between the wall and the floor. And we have a nice shadow, which is blended with another, with a copy of the floor itself that is then blended on top of everything. I could add a shadow over here, which I will probably get to next week when I continue this. And yeah, I may begin to complicate this scene a little bit. I don't want to make it overly complicated, I like the simplicity of it. But I may add a few other elements just to add to the feel of the scene, to make it feel a lot more embodied, if you will. Because I like a scene that feels a lot more robust and less like, you know, it just exists, so to speak. I like there to be depth, that your eyes can begin to pick up more and more details. So that's probably something that I'll focus on in the next stream. But I think I'm liking the direction things are going. So actually, let me do, before I close off, let me add one more thing that I am thinking of having in this scene, which is a picture frame up here. So let me see, where am I gonna put this? Alright, above table, the table layers, I'm gonna drop it there. Last week I was saying I want to keep this super simple, and I still will, but I like when there are elements in a picture that keep you noticing things. Just like how I was saying last week, I'm going to actually add some detail in the window. The way you're looking outside the window, you realize there's life out there, so to speak. We're going to get to that next week. Well, hopefully we'll get to it next week if we have the time. By the way, I always covet your feedback. I love to hear from you if you watch these videos and they are helpful to you. If there are any questions that you have, you can also drop them in the comments or the chat, and I will definitely get back to you as soon as I can with replies and any information you need, like if you need resources or where you can find other programs that you can use, etc. Anything like that, I'm always open to your questions, your feedback, your comments, everything. Also, I'm very much interested to hear if there are any topics that you'd like me to cover. I've done at least one series before, which is the Humanality Project, that I plan to continue and expand upon in the future. But I need to do some planning on that. But if you have any topics that are pressing on your mind that you'd like me to tackle, whether it be in design or even for my CSS streams as well, just let me know and I will prepare for it and get around to it. Same thing with tutorials, not just streams. If you want me to do any tutorials on any specific features or anything really in Inkscape and CSS, you can let me know and I will get around to that. I'm gonna have some fun with this picture frame now, and instead of this being a photo, it's gonna be a drawing. So I'm imagining that whoever owns this house or whatever has a drawing, by me of course, on their wall. And this is where you can really get creative in design. There's not anything to do with Inkscape specifically, but just in terms of drawing and design and stuff, you can get really creative. Like, imagine that someone has your art on their wall, like if you're doing a scene like this, and you can have some fun drawing a scene within a scene. Makes things a lot more interesting. So I'm gonna, oops, that is thicker than I wanted, and it is also the wrong color. Oh, I remember now why that's so thick, because stroke is on and fill is off. So let me delete that and go again. Okay, there we go. Now it's too thin, so I'm gonna need to adjust the the thickness. Good, there we go. Alrighty. Now, thinking of doing one of my usual scenes of something next to a pond. Now don't worry if this overlays the picture frame itself, because that can be raised above everything else in the layer and cover them. Or it could even be moved to its own layer if I needed to do that as well. Now again, mentioning decision making in terms of artwork. When you're doing stuff like this, it's a good way to add complexity to a scene without overcomplicating it, because this is a self-contained object here. The picture inside of a picture frame is self-contained, but it still adds complexity and depth that like anybody who's looking at it can see that some detail went into it without it being cluttered in the actual image, so it doesn't feel like you overdid it and you're not overselling anything, but you still manage to add that complexity to the image. I'm gonna add some ripples here in the water. And a splash. Of course, no one can see anything behind the plant, but I still feel like drawing it in. And I'm imagining that somebody is having a picnic next to this pond or something. So there's a mat. And this time I'm going to put the person laying down, arms above their head. One arm is out to a side like this because they just threw a rock into the pond. And for the sake of some detail, I'm just adding lines to the mat that they're laying on. Nothing too complicated or extravagant here, because you still don't want to take too much attention away from the main picture that we are looking at, even though you're adding some detail to it by adding this scene in the background on a picture frame. You're still keeping it kind of simple. Of course, no pawn scene of mine is complete without a plant. Now, typically I'm very much concerned about detail, but in this case I'm not all that concerned about it, because when you zoom out, details kind of get lost in translation. Although, if you're going for true photorealism or realism just in general, I would advise you pay attention to detail even when it's minuscule, because it does pile up in a way. I mean, it does get obscured enough that you can get away with it, but it can pile up in a way. So if real true realism is your goal, you know, you really want to make sure you pay attention to detail like that. But in this case, I'm not as concerned, because I'm just doing this to give character to the scene. Alright, let's see how this looks when I zoom out. I think what I'm actually going to do here is resize the picture and the picture frame itself, make them a bit smaller. So group everything together and drag from the bottom or the top to resize vertically, and then I'm going to resize this as well, just in a general sense, and drag it up like this. Alright, not too small because there's still some detail you want visible here. Let me see, right, over here. Alright, it's obviously inside the wrong part of this window. Alright, let me try. Okay, there it is. It's moving as I want it to. Still trying to match the areas I didn't draw in. Like the part of their hand that was throwing something, I didn't draw that in, so still trying to match that back to the rest of the image. Alright, there we go. Let me just select all these paths and make them a little more translucent, if you will. Forgot to turn off my email before streaming. Oops, 1.6 there. Alright. I'm gonna blur these just slightly, just to give us a nice blending of the image into the canvas. I don't want to blur it too much, but just enough that it looks a little more smooth. I think I'm actually gonna bring down the blurring just a bit, then I'm gonna duplicate them, turn down the opacity and the blurring, and we should be good. Alright, that is everything for today. I'm gonna stick a pin in it for now. I may come back to this, and if I feel like it, adjust this picture frame, because it kind of takes away slightly from the plant. In fact, before I complain too much, I could just move it. Now I think about it. Let me see. I still want the picture frame, but I'm kind of in between two minds on where I want it. Maybe next week I'll come to a better decision on that. Or maybe I could put a clock up here. A clock wouldn't be too complex and complicate the scene too much, while still allowing for some extra character to the scene, I guess. I can get a little indecisive about these things, as we artists do, but hey, it's all part of the fun of designing. Alright, in any case, I'm liking the direction this scene is going in, and it's coming together nicely, so I will have some fun working on this next week when we return to it. And in future graphic streams, as I said, I'm going to get back to some structured teaching and tutorials and stuff, so you can look out for that. But if you have, as I said, any questions or anything you want to know more about, you can leave me some feedback in the comments, and I will definitely get back to you as soon as I can. Alright, hope that all of you enjoyed today. Make sure you share this video with a friend, family member, your dog, your cat. Just kidding, but make sure you share this video with anybody who would be interested in learning more about Inkscape. Need to let more people know that there is software like this out there that you can use without having to break the bank, because it is hard enough as a designer, just doing what we do. So yeah, hopefully more people will check out this stuff. But yeah, until next time, I am Roland Taylor, aka Roland Dixar. You can follow me on Twitter and Twitch and on YouTube. I do regular streams every Tuesday for graphics and every Thursday for CSS and web design in general. You can look out for me on Tuesdays at a new time starting next week. I was trying for 1:30, but I may go for a later time on Tuesdays as well. On Thursdays, the time is always 5:30 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. For those of you who are under daylight savings time, but Eastern Standard Time, that would be 4:30 p.m. EST, under DST. Yeah. But you can check my website, rolanddixar.pro/streaming, for any information and updates. And also, as soon as I get around to it, you can start following my blog on there. I'll be posting updates and tutorials and such like on there. And you can also check out my stores. They're all listed on that page. My streaming page has links to everything. You can check those out as well. Alright, so see y'all next week, and we will get back to some more designing. Have a good one.